Good morning, everyone, and thank you very much for joining me. This is our Crypto Minute. My name is Russell Shaw, Senior Market Specialist at FXCM. My email address is arthur@fxcm.com, and today is Wednesday. It's the 6th of July. I'm just going to bring up our high-risk investment warning. I'm going to keep this on screen for a few moments, and just bring up our commentaries disclaimer here as well. And just our references, market scope and trading view. Let's just bring up this again, right? So we saw that there was nowhere really to hide yesterday. That's not quite exactly true. Interestingly, Bitcoin held its own, and that to me was number one, it was weird. Number two, it was fascinating. Okay, so here is gold dropping. Okay, so it drops like a stone. Bitcoin doesn't. That to me was very, very interesting. And why I think that is interesting is because when there is bad news, and the market tends to ignore it for an instrument, that gets your attention. That's why you've got to ask, why isn't it reacting when everything else is? Now, I don't think it's a secret. I'm not a huge Bitcoin fan. I see very little evidence to support the claims that are made, about Bitcoin. However, it held its own yesterday at a time when the market is really worried about recession. I think that is interesting and something that bears watching. Now, the top chart here is Bitcoin. I want to just keep an eye on it. Let's take this stochastic out here. I want to keep an eye on it as we also keep an eye on the inversion of the yield curve. So yesterday, we suggested the yield curve is just about to invert with the prospect of the 75 basis points for July, with the 50 basis points that's currently priced in for September. The odds of the inversion are extremely the odds have narrowed considerably. What I mean by the odds narrowing, the probability must be getting very close to 1, or at least that's what we're thinking yesterday. Well, it's inverted. It's inverted, and now it's kind of deciding whether it wants to stay inverted or not. Now, the point about an inversion is not whether it inverts because of market volatility, and yesterday was a volatile day. An inversion needs to invert, okay? It needs to invert for a fair amount of time, and that would tell us something. So the fact that the inversion has begun, that's sort of step one of keeping an eye on it. Does it remain inverted? And if it remains inverted, how come Bitcoin hasn't priced that in, or has the pricing already taken place in Bitcoin? So this is the question that we need to ponder. Let's just bring up US dollar here. So at the moment, Bitcoin has got the Bitcoin dollar has got a solid bid underneath it, and I'm going to bring back that stochastic in. Let's just bring it in. All right, and so this is the stochastic of the dollar. It's gone into its upper quintile. As long as it holds there, one would think the dollar is going to be bid. And if the dollar is going to be bid, the obvious question is, well, this is our crypto minute, is it going to apply pressure onto cryptos? It had huge pressure. There's huge pressure on gold price yesterday. Why not cryptos? So that's the situation we find ourselves in, and it's a conundrum. One potential answer to this, okay, is of course to look at Bitcoin in terms of the monthly. Let's go back to the monthly here. Let's take this guy out. Let's take this guy out. Let's put it on monthly. And what we want to do here is take a look at the Copac. Just putting in the 0 line. All right, so we're pretty close to the 0 here. I was actually, to be quite honest, surprised when we took a look at this, and the fact that it hasn't dropped below that 0. But the fact is, it's getting pretty close to that. I guess what we can call the line in the sand between growth and value, as per the Copac. Maybe there is some sort of suggestion here that just because the repricing of Bitcoin has been so severe, maybe at this stage all the bad news has been discounted. And if that's the case, if all the bad news has been discounted, well then, perhaps we get some sort of base. If we get some sort of base, maybe that rebuilds up the confidence in the crypto, and then we start moving up. Now, this is all heavy conjecture at the moment, because it really comes down to, does Bitcoin hold any value? The US dollar, okay, at the moment has been the main driver of the Bitcoin US dollar pairing. As the US dollar has appreciated, it's put huge pressure on Bitcoin prices. Bitcoin prices have dropped like a stone. So if the market now has the mindset that cash is king, and it's just throwing all its capital back into the greenback, and the Bitcoin is holding up, that to me means that we need to pay attention, okay? But I don't want to be premature with this either. Okay, I don't want to be premature with this either. It just, to me, was very interesting. The whole market was capitulating yesterday, and I was looking at Bitcoin. I was looking, it wasn't moving, just wasn't moving. And I was thinking, that's odd. That is so odd, especially in this time of demand destruction. So let's just keep an eye on that. Another point to make here with regards to the US dollar. Let's just bring that up here. Is that to me, it is looking, it's starting to look top heavy. It's been a tremendous instrument to pay attention to since the bottom in February last year, because it's been absolutely rampaging since then. but we don't want to fall in love with any instrument. Okay, we don't want to fall in love with any instrument. We want to try and be objective. If it seems to be sort of reaching its apex, then it seems to be reaching its apex. Just like if something seems to be reaching its nadir, like Bitcoin, then it seems to be reaching its nadir being trough, right? So let's just take a look at this in terms of a monthly chart. And what we want to do here is, let's take out the stochastic. And we want to throw in the RSI, okay, because the RSI is really what we use for to measure just how much higher something can go. So let's just throw that in. Now, once we get to weekly chart, the timing aspect goes really out of the window. Well, we're not on weekly, we're on Monday, or we're on monthly. So timing over here is nigh on impossible, right? But the point is, we are overbought. Now, the reason that it's worth keeping an eye on an overbought condition is because generally the RSI it follows what we call the Pareto principle. Okay, it subscribes to the Pareto principle. What's the Pareto principle? It's the 80-20 rule, which generally you'll find holds in most places. For example, okay, 80% of your results in trading, tend to come from 20% of your trades. That makes sense in terms of a distribution curve. Okay, so in this case, what do we mean by the Pareto? It means 80% of the time it's going to be trading between 20 and 80. Just, it's funny that it's 2080. It's only 2080 because I've chosen that over 3070. But what I'm suggesting is that the Pareto principle means that only 20% of the time is it going to go into what we regard as excess. And just taking a look here, it's maybe it's a 90-10 rule, but we'll just call it Pareto's principle for the moment. And it's actually not Pareto's principle, it's Pareto's rule. Okay, Pareto's principle is different in economics. But the idea here is over here we went overbought, so we go back to 2015. It still had some legs, but eventually it found a ceiling, and that ceiling maintained for years. Okay, maintained for years, right? And so we're kind of there now. All right. So in terms of how high can we go? Well, if the RSI theory has anything to say about it, we're probably quite near the apex. However, and this is why this year's market analysis is so difficult. We haven't been in this type of a macroeconomic situation since the 70s. So, and what I'm talking about is just the rampant inflation. Okay, so the rampant inflation, which effectively started with the supply shocks in the 70s, we had the oil crisis. One, shortly after the Yom Kippur War, we had oil crisis. Two, after the Iranian Revolution, going into the early 80s, and that's where we are now. We're kind of at 40-year highs, right? So that makes analysis very, very different, because it introduces variables which we haven't seen for 40 years, making the analysis extremely difficult, because how does it fit into our models? But nevertheless, we will keep an eye on it. Okay, we will keep an eye on it. There is a tenet of technical analysis. Now, what I'm about to say is hugely controversial and probably debatable, but there's effectively three cornerstones that technical analysis is. There's three tenets of technical analysis. The one is price moves in trends. I'm comfortable with that one. Okay. But next to a little bit more problematic, the less problematic is that market participant behavior is consistent. I think that the bear markets of sort of the past probably have similar behavior of current bear markets, etc. The third one, okay, this is hugely problematic. Price discounts all available information. Okay, that's hugely problematic because what it effectively is saying is that it's pricing in the change up in the macroeconomic variables on the ground. It might, but it may not. So efficient markets hypothesis is different. That's not what we're saying in technical analysis. What we're saying in technical analysis is that the stagflation environment's been priced in to technical analysis. That's hugely problematic. That's hugely problematic. So if it holds true, by the way, if it holds true, then the US dollar, is looking top heavy. Looking top heavy. Okay, and if it's looking top heavy, and the US dollar starts coming down, what does that mean for Bitcoin? What does that mean for gold? You know, what does it mean for any commodity that's priced in dollars? There's some sort of support that's going to come in. The issue, of course, is that say copper is priced in dollars. Copper still has an intrinsic value to it because it's used in industry. If there's no demand for the actual commodity, even if there is some sort of demand from the US dollar side, there has to be an interplay between the forces, between numerator and denominator. Bitcoin's odd because I don't see the value in Bitcoin. It just blows my mind. I mean, El Salvador, I think, has just just lost a considerable amount of wealth by adopting it as a currency. It blows my mind. But the idea here is, it just seems to be much more prone to emotion. And if it's much more prone to emotion, then the fact that if the US dollar is looking top heavy and Bitcoin is not reacting in at a time when the yield curve is starting to invert, that's got my interest. Would I trade Bitcoin now? Not a chance, but I'm watching it. I'm watching it with interest. If it continues to capitulate, and we'll deal with that as it comes. But yesterday's lack of movement, that caught my attention. Okay, and it's saying here high increase of Bitcoin use in Turkey. Okay, so there could be maybe some sort of demand pressures coming in from Turkey, which again is highly likely. If we have to bring in, let's just bring in the Turkish lira here. The Turkey is a macro experiment in the making. Their monetary policy is ludicrous. Okay, their monetary policy is absolutely ludicrous. They have a huge amount of political interference in their central bank, to the point in that instead of raising rates, they're cutting rates in a highly inflationary environment. Every single bank in the world, except Bank of Japan, which is kind of a playbook in of itself, is running to cover themselves from inflation. Turkey decides they're going to cut rates. And what's subsequently happened there is the Turkish lira has been absolutely pulverized. Okay, it's been absolutely pulverized. Let's go. Yeah. Okay. So there's been a currency crisis in Turkey, which is set to continue as long as the macroeconomic fundamentals are influenced by Erdogan. And the fact of the matter is, they are not stemming inflation in any shape or form. They are really just, I don't know, clowning around. I don't know how else to describe it. So the idea here is the adoption of Bitcoin might very well be an option. I'll be honest with you, and I don't see it as an appropriate alternative. Just as there has been a huge amount of depreciation in the Turkish lira, the same thing can be said for Bitcoin. There's been a huge amount of depreciation in Bitcoin. Neither one of them are holding their value, but at least with the Turkish lira, you can understand why. So you're just adopting one volatile currency for another volatile currency. I'm not sure you are saving yourself any form of grief. Nevertheless, yesterday, Bitcoin held its own, and that in of itself is fascinating. That in of itself is fascinating. All right. Many Bitcoiners are blinkered and only see Bitcoin. I would agree with that. 200% inflation in Turkey, I would agree with that. I don't know the exact figure, but I know that they are getting lambasted. A lot of Bitcoiners don't look at macroeconomic influences. Exactly. And YouTubers have to apologize before it produces. Exactly. But the point is, so what's the point there? The point is that it's driven by emotion more than anything. And again, the fact that it didn't implode yesterday completely surprised me. So I'm still skeptical of Bitcoin as an instrument, but I continue to watch it because yesterday it held its own after being absolutely hammered. So the idea here is, let's just keep an eye on it. I think you guys, I mean, I don't hide my views on it. I expect prices to go lower, logically speaking, but US dollar seems top heavy. Bitcoin has emotional value. That's the only thing I can see. Well, maybe that has something to say about this. So we're just going to keep an eye on this. We'll keep an eye on this and see, okay, if it runs any risk of reacting off of the current key levels, because that's where we are at the moment. All right, I think we can just take a look at Ethereum, and then we will I think call this sort of the conclusion of this week's. But we can see that even yesterday, I guess the Ethereum held its own. Very interesting. I think it's in very much the same sort of key level challenge that Bitcoin is facing. So we'll just keep an eye on that. One more thing, just before we go, let's just take a look at the Ethereum's COPOC. I would expect Ethereum's COPOC to be negative. Still not. Amazing. Gee, these things were running so hot. Let's just put in a 0 here. That does surprise me. All right. Let's keep an eye on that. Any questions, guys? Any questions? Any questions? All right, let's wrap up here. Thank you very much for joining. Have a great day, great evening. We'll do it all again tomorrow. Thanks very much, guys.